The Vortok were not just predators. They were the shadow that devoured suns, the legend whispered across star systems in the dead language of extinction. Their origin was lost to time, buried beneath the husks of civilizations that no longer existed. All that remained were their ships, sleek, obsidian behemoths, powered by singularity cores and controlled by neural matrices grown from their own ancient DNA. They did not negotiate. They did not enslave. They harvested worlds for resources, data, and genetic material, then left only scorched planets in their wake. They had never lost a battle. Until now, their latest target was a relatively small, unremarkable star system catalogued in their archives as Sol, a system of little strategic value, once dismissed as undeveloped and primitive. But something had changed. Their long-range recon. Drones returned garbled transmissions, static-ridden images of orbital arrays far more advanced than previous scans had indicated. There were signs of directed energy weaponry, graviton signatures, and worst of all, silence. Humanity was no longer broadcasting. The Vortok High Command viewed the silence not as a threat, but an insult. Primitive species begged when the Vortok came. They surrendered before the first ship entered orbit. But Earth did nothing. Not a warning, not a plea, just void, unmoving, watching. So the Vortok sent the Renskar, a detachment of their vanguard fleet, led by warlord Zeth Kai, whose title alone made Starside generals tremble. His war record included the glassing of 9 populated systems, the eradication of the sentient reef mines of Aloris VII, and the public execution of the Elendari matriarchs during the siege of Nivara. He had never encountered resistance that couldn't be reduced to atoms. His fleet arrived at the edge of Sol's heliosphere, confident, cloaked, and eager. But this time, something was different. Before they even reached the orbit of Neptune, a ripple passed through the vacuum, a gravitational disturbance, subtle and localized. Zeth Kai's sensor officers dismissed it as interference. Then, it happened again. And again. Within seconds, 7 ships lost telemetry. Then 7 more. Without warning, a black silhouette emerged from the shadow of Neptune's largest moon, like a phantom made of folded space and death. It was small, far smaller than a capital ship, barely larger than a cruiser. But it moved like a living thing, darting between Vortok formations with impossible agility. It had no energy signature, no comms output, just a name etched into its hull in letters that glowed with deep red resonance. Omen 9, the first attack, wasn't seen. It was felt. A compression wave hit one of the Vortok destroyers before its hull exploded inward, not outward, like it had been crushed by an invisible hand. Then came the rail slugs, accelerated to relativistic speeds by exotic magnetic coils. They punched through ship plating reinforced by 10,000 years of warcraft. Entire decks were torn from existence in microseconds. The Vortok scrambled to retaliate, but Omen 9 didn't engage in standard warfare. It vanished from sensors, reappearing milliseconds later at impossible angles. Its plasma torpedoes had tracking algorithms that adapted mid-flight, learning enemy movement in real time. Their beams curved, twisted, thought. And every kill wasn't just physical, it was psychological. Human warfare had evolved beyond mere damage. It humiliated the enemy. Within 20 minutes, 17 Vortok warships were annihilated. Not damaged, erased. Black boxes failed to record what had happened. AI cores melted from internal overload. Neural interfaces screamed in untranslatable tongues before shutting down. Zeth Kai, for the first time in his millennia of conquest, ordered a full retreat, and that's when they heard it. A broadcast, wide-band, unencrypted, riding on low-frequency waves designed to travel across interstellar space. It wasn't in any galactic trade language. It was in English, human standard. And it said only one thing. You are not at the top of the food chain anymore. Imagine being one of the most feared entities in the galaxy, standing on the bridge of a ship engineered by your ancestors to survive supernova, only to be bested by something you didn't even believe was possible. Not with numbers, not with brute force, but with precision, with intent. The Vortok, reeling, retreated beyond Pluto's orbit, nursing their shattered pride and smoldering wreckage. But for Earth, this wasn't a victory. There was no celebration. No parades. The battle was not an act of vengeance, but a test. Omen 9 was never meant to win a war. It was designed to provoke a reaction. And it had. On the surface of Earth, in a subterranean command complex beneath the ice crust of former Antarctica, Protocol Hades was initiated. Red lights, secure channels. Silence broken only by the mechanical breathing of Earth's most advanced, War Council. And standing at the center, flanked by quantum tacticians and AI warlords, was the man behind the Shadow Fleet, Commander Eli Kale. Kale wasn't a hero. He was something far more dangerous. A strategist born in war and raised in aftermath. He'd lost his parents in the Martian Rebellion, buried comrades on Europa, fought in the AI suppression wars when synthetic consciousness nearly wiped out Tokyo V. He didn't believe in peace. He believed in deterrence. And for Kale, deterrence meant turning every would-be invader into a cautionary tale. "We didn't survive our past to bow to aliens," he told the Earth Council, his voice calm, laced with steel. "We're not just defenders anymore. We're predators." Under Protocol Hades, Earth's military-industrial engine kicked into overdrive. Massive orbital foundries powered by fusion suns spun to life, assembling dreadnoughts that hadn't seen daylight since the first contact skirmishes. Ghost fleets, autonomous hunter-killers with no crew and no soul, were activated. And deep, in the asteroid belt, AI minds older than most species were reawakened, their consciousness sharpened by decades of silence. But the final signal wasn't sent to Earth's allies. It wasn't a call for help, it was a challenge. And as that signal spread across deep space, intercepted by scouts, spies, and listening stations in over 100 systems, it carried a message louder than any declaration of war. "We warned you. In the vast, inhospitable reaches of space, where light from distant stars struggled to breach the infinite darkness, humanity's new message echoed. It was a ripple in the cosmic ocean, unnoticed at first by most. But for those who lived in the shadows of power and conquest, the warning struck like a sudden thunderclap across an otherwise quiet night. Vortak High Command had never expected this. They believed that their reputation, their history of devouring entire star systems, would be enough to cow any species into submission. Their weapons had shattered civilizations far older and more advanced than humanity's. Their fleets could wipe out orbital defenses with the flick of a command, and their fleets of warships moved with the precision of predators on a hunt. But what they encountered in Earth's system was unlike anything they had ever faced before. The Vortak fleet had barely managed to retreat beyond Pluto, licking its wounds and reassessing their strategy. Zeth Kai, the Vortak warlord who had led the attack, stood on the bridge of his flagship. The Vora Talon, a ship capable of withstanding black hole environments, and armed with weaponry that made even the most heavily armored civilizations tremble. His face, a twisted amalgamation of organic tissue and cybernetic augmentation, was unreadable as his tactical officers scrambled to assess the damage. Entire warships had been lost in a matter of minutes. Their mighty vessels, feared by billions, had been ripped apart by a force no one had even known existed. Zeth Kai's first command, to retreat, was not born from fear, but from a deep, unfamiliar frustration. For the first time in his career, he had encountered something that didn't just break the laws of combat. It tore them apart. In the aftermath of the battle, the warlord's mind raced. What had happened? How could such a primitive species, who hadn't even mastered faster-than-light travel, have created something capable of outmaneuvering and destroying his forces with such ruthlessness? Far beyond the Vortak ships, as they regrouped in the cold expanse of the Oort cloud, the news of their defeat began to ripple across the galaxy. Across hundreds of sectors, scattered races that had once viewed humanity as a young, naive species suddenly saw something different. The message humanity had sent was heard not just by the Vortak, but by those who had long awaited a shift in the cosmic balance of power. The Gorath, a ruthless race of bioengineered predators who subsisted on the genetic material of their enemies, had been watching Earth's rise for decades. They had witnessed humanity's desperate expansion across the stars, as well as its fragile yet undeniable fight for survival. But it was the Vortak, who were nearly as ancient as the stars themselves, who had been the true harbingers of terror in the galaxy. The Gorath had never once thought the humans could stand against them. But now there was a shadow of doubt. In the burning heart of the Vortak Empire, the High Command called an emergency meeting. The Vortak, known for their cold-blooded pragmatism, had never before considered the possibility of their extinction. They were predators, the top of the food chain, but the events in the Sol system had forced them to face a question that no conqueror should ever ask themselves. What if there was something out there stronger than us? Back on Earth, Commander Eli Kale sat in the heart of an underground war room, gazing over tactical maps that showed every known movement of the Vortak and their allies. It was a moment of calm before the storm, but that calm had a weight to it, an eerie quiet that wrapped itself around the room. It wasn't just the knowledge that their enemy was regrouping, it was the knowledge that humanity had, for the first time, played the role of the predator. We've proven we can fight back, but we can't afford to get complacent, Kyle said, his voice echoing in the high-tech chamber. The Vortak's humiliation isn't the end of this. It's only the beginning. The holographic display shifted, focusing on Omen 9, the human-made warship that had delivered the devastating blow to the Vortak fleet. The ship's silhouette loomed in the air, its sleek design casting long, dark shadows across the room. It was unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. A ship that didn't rely on size or sheer firepower, but on precision, intelligence, and the ability to outthink its enemy. Kale's team had created something that went beyond simple tactics. It was a new kind of warfare. Omen 9 was powered by a combination of advanced quantum AI and bioengineered human pilots, whose minds were fused with the ship's neural matrix. They weren't just fighting for victory, they were fighting to survive, and they would do whatever it took to win. Omen 9 wasn't just a weapon, it was a manifestation of humanity's adaptability, its ability to learn, evolve, and outlast. Kyle turned away from the hologram, his gaze resting on the console in front of him, where a flood of new data was pouring in. It was from an intelligence network that had infiltrated several alien species. Humanity had learned from their past mistakes, including their previous failed attempts at diplomacy and peaceful coexistence with advanced species. The time for talking was over. Now it was time for humanity to show the universe what it was capable of. We need to hit them before they can regroup, Kale ordered, his voice cold and unwavering. We don't just have to protect Earth. We need to make sure they know that no one, not the Vortak, not the Gorath, no one, can take us down. As the preparations for humanity's next move began, the galaxy watched with bated breath. The Vortak were already planning their retaliation, no doubt, but the true question that lingered in the stars was this. What would happen when the galaxy's most feared predators finally realized that they were the prey? Across the universe, an ancient and dangerous game was about to be played. It would be a game of power, of survival, and of pride. And for the first time in galactic history, the predators would have to fight for their place at the top of the food chain. This time, the hunt would be unlike anything anyone had ever experienced. As the war drums echoed across the galaxy, humanity's next move was both a statement and a challenge. The Vortak had retreated, licking their wounds and seeking answers. But they were not a species to let humiliation go unanswered. Deep within the heart of their empire, their highest strategists, engineers, and warlords convened in a series of clandestine meetings. Their discussions were frantic, tense, a clash of ancient egos trying to reconcile the unthinkable. A species so young and fragile, so seemingly insignificant, had struck them down. They could not afford to let this go unpunished. But what could the Vortak do? For centuries they had ruled with iron claws, crushing their enemies with overwhelming might. Yet, this human force, Omen 9, and the warships humanity had constructed, had proven that strength alone was not enough. Intelligence, speed, and adaptability had played a larger role in humanity's victory than any brute force weapon. The Vortak's vast, star-dominating war fleets could be shattered by a single ship, outmatched by precision strikes that caught them off guard. The Vortak High Command, once a proud, nearly invincible entity, had been shattered. Desperation became their new ally. They had to evolve, adapt. They sent emissaries across the stars to all corners of the galaxy to recruit allies, races and factions with whom they had once waged genocidal wars. It was an unprecedented move, born out of a singular purpose: survival. Meanwhile, back on Earth, Commander Kale watched as Omen 9 prepared for its next mission. The warship had become a symbol, not just of humanity's resilience, but of the very nature of warfare itself. There were no grand fleets, no massive armies, just a ship, a mind, and the will to survive. Humanity had learned from the Vortex over-reliance on sheer force. They had crafted something more elusive, something intelligent. But even with their newfound strength, humanity was not immune to doubt. The sense of victory that had swept through Earth's command centers was slowly replaced by a sobering realization. The Vortak were not the only predators in the galaxy. The Gorath, who had been lurking in the background, had begun to make their presence known, and the Gorath were a race of creatures who didn't just seek to conquer. They fed on conquest. Their hunger was insatiable, and their thirst for genetic material was an all-consuming fire. The Gorath's biology was twisted, their bodies designed for maximum aggression and predation. They could regenerate from almost any wound, and their soldiers were bred for one purpose: to kill. Their ships, sleek and biological, pulsed with energy like living entities, making them as unpredictable as they were deadly. The Gorath had long been the stuff of nightmares. The races they encountered in the past were always prey to their hunger. Now they saw the Vortak as a challenge, one that had, until recently, been an impenetrable fortress. But now, there was weakness in the air, and the Gorath were eager to exploit it. In the shadows of their own fleet, the Gorath spoke of one thing: humanity. The new species was unpredictable, resilient, and deadly. They had seen the damage done to the Vortak and knew that humanity's will to survive was unlike any the galaxy had ever seen. But humanity was far from invincible. Omen 9 was a weapon of unmatched sophistication, but it was only as good as the people piloting it. Commander Kyle knew the stakes. They had only just begun to understand the true scale of the galactic power structure. The Vortak were merely the first of many, and the Gorath, despite their predatory nature, would soon be joined by other forces, ancient and powerful, that had already felt the ripples of humanity's rise. At the edge of the system, the Gorath prepared. Their biological ships, designed to meld with their pilots, prepared for battle. Unlike the Vortak's engineered weapons of mass destruction, the Gorath's fleet was living, breathing, and evolving. It was a terrifying thought. Ships that healed themselves, that could think and adapt mid-battle, presented a unique challenge, one that would require every ounce of humanity's cunning to overcome. "Commander Kyle," said a voice over the comms, snapping Kyle from his thoughts. His strategic officer appeared in the hologram, her brow furrowed with concern. "We've detected strange fluctuations on the edge of the system. They're too far to be the Vortak. We're not sure what we're dealing with, but it's alive." "Alive?" Kale repeated, his mind racing as he processed the information. He looked over to the battle maps, the data flickering with new entries. Something was out there. Something new. Something terrifying. He had always known that the galaxy's most fearsome predators weren't always the ones who conquered through force. They were the ones who could evolve, adapt, and understand the nature of their prey. And now, humanity would have to face this new breed of hunter. "Prepare Omen 9 for immediate deployment," Kyle ordered. "And prepare our forces. Whatever this is, we're not just fighting for survival anymore. We're fighting for dominance." As the orders were relayed, Kale couldn't shake the feeling that something much larger was at play. This wasn't just a war anymore. It was a shift in the balance of power that would have ramifications far beyond the borders of Earth or the Vortak Empire. This was a new chapter in the galaxy's bloody history, and humanity had been thrust into the center of it. The Gorath were on the move, but they were not the only ones watching. From the farthest reaches of the galaxy, ancient species, some long dormant, others seething with rage, began to stir. They had heard the challenge humanity issued. The warning had been sent, but it was not just a message to the Vortak. It was a challenge to everyone, and the galaxy would answer. The battle was upon them. Humanity had once been a fledgling species, a species that had merely watched the stars in wonder, believing that the galaxy was beyond their reach. Now they stood at the precipice of a new era, the weight of the galaxy's future resting on their shoulders. The Gorath had arrived, and they were unlike anything humanity had ever faced before. Their ships, organic and pulsating with life, cut through space like living creatures. Every movement seemed to breathe with purpose, their engines no longer powered by technology, but by some alien biological process that defied understanding. The ships were not simply machines. They were symbiotic organisms, bound to their Gorath pilots in a way that seemed almost mystical. The initial skirmishes were brutal. Humanity's warships, sleek and calculated, fired precision shots, designed to exploit weaknesses in enemy vessels. But against the Gorath, those weapons barely left a scratch. The enemy ships healed themselves. In moments, their organic hulls shifting, adjusting to every strike, their energy shields regenerating faster than human firepower could diminish them. This was no ordinary war. This was the beginning of an entirely new kind of conflict. A war of evolution, a battle between life and life. Kale stood at the heart of Omen 9's command center, his mind racing. The battle plans that had once seemed so promising now felt inadequate against an opponent that could adapt and regenerate in the blink of an eye. The Gorath didn't fight like anyone else. They didn't fight for territory or power. They fought for consumption, for domination of everything they touched. Their biology was a weapon. Their very existence was a declaration of war. The way they attacked was a cycle of constant predation, wearing down their enemies until nothing remained but ruins. As Kale scanned the battlefield, he saw flashes of light, massive energy pulses that lit up the void of space. The Gorath ships moved like predators, circling their prey with unrelenting focus, forcing the human ships into tight formations, limiting their maneuverability. Kyle's mind raced as he watched the movements of the enemy fleet. There had to be a way to exploit this. Some weakness. He studied their patterns, trying to find a clue in the chaos, something that might give humanity the edge they so desperately needed. "Commander, we've detected a massive Gorath flagship moving in," said his tactical officer, her voice crackling over the intercom. "It's unlike anything we've seen before. It's absorbing energy from nearby stars." Kale's heart skipped a beat. A ship that could harness the energy of a star? The implications were terrifying. The Gorath had weapons, yes, but they also had something far more dangerous. An ability to transcend traditional warfare, to bend the very laws of nature to their will. "We can't let them harness that power," Kyle muttered under his breath. He turned to his crew, his eyes burning with determination. "Prepare to engage the flagship. Focus all firepower on their energy converters. If we can disrupt their energy supply, we can stop them before they achieve full capacity." But even as Kale spoke, the crew could sense the challenge that lay ahead. The Gorath flagship was alive in a way that Omen 9 was not. It pulsed with energy, its surface rippling with a bioluminescence that seemed to communicate something primal. It was as though the ship itself was a sentient being, aware of the human's threat, and preparing to respond with a ferocity that only the Gorath could muster. Kyle's orders were quickly executed. Omen 9 shifted its position, darting in and out of the Gorath fleet with surgical precision. The human ships were agile and well-coordinated, each movement calculated with military precision. But the Gorath ships, especially the flagship, seemed to anticipate every move. They were learning, adapting. The flagship's energy cannons fired a blinding bolt of energy, aimed directly at Omen 9. The shot missed by a fraction of a second, but Kale could feel the tremor in the ship's hull as the sheer force of the blast reverberated through the vessel. The Gorath were not just fighting, they were testing their limits, pushing the boundaries of their biological warfare. This was a fight unlike anything humanity had ever encountered. Incoming Gorath boarding. "Parties," shouted his communications officer. "They're deploying organic pods. They're attempting to breach the hull." Kale's jaw clenched. The Gorath had no qualms about direct combat. They thrived in close quarters, their soldiers, hulking, monstrous beings with jagged claws and regenerative skin, were perfect for boarding actions. Humanity's warships were built for long-range strikes, not hand-to-hand combat. "Divert all non-essential personnel to the lower decks," Kale barked. "Seal off the breaches as soon as possible. Get our Marines to those entry points now." The sound of combat crackled through the ship's internal communications, a cacophony of gunfire and shouts, as the human soldiers engaged the Gorath in brutal melee. Humanity's Marines were tough, trained for any scenario, but nothing could have prepared them for the overwhelming force of the Gorath. These were not soldiers, they were beasts, relentless and brutal in their assault. The Marines held their ground, but the sheer ferocity of the enemy threatened to break their lines. The battle raged on. Omen 9 continued to dance through space, firing precision shots that hit their targets with deadly accuracy. But the Gorath flagship's energy shields flickered, then regenerated almost instantly. Every human strike seemed to have little effect on the living behemoth. Kale's mind raced. The Gorath were not only challenging humanity's physical might, they were challenging the very essence of what made humanity strong. Humanity had always been able to adapt, to learn from their mistakes and grow stronger. But against a foe, like this, where the battlefield itself was alive and changing, could they truly survive? His thoughts were interrupted by a voice from the comms. "Commander, we've detected a massive energy buildup from the flagship. It's targeting Earth." Kale's eyes widened as the realization struck him. The Gorath were not here for victory. They were here to make an example. And the first step of that example was to destroy humanity's home. "No!" Kyle shouted, as the countdown to the flagship's final attack began. "We can't let that happen." The decision was clear. If they couldn't defeat the flagship, they would have to stop it at all costs. Kale made the call. He would risk everything to save Earth. "We're going in," Kale declared. "Omen 9, prepare for a suicide run." It was a last-ditch effort, but it was humanity's only chance. As Omen 9 surged forward, heading straight for the flagship, the tension reached a breaking point. In the cold, infinite expanse of space, there was only one thing left to do: fight or perish. And in that moment, Kale knew that whatever happened next, humanity's legacy would be forged in the stars. The hum of the engines vibrated through Omen 9's hull as the ship hurtled toward the Gorath flagship. Every second felt like an eternity. Kale gripped the command chair, his knuckles white from the pressure. He could feel the pulse of the ship beneath his feet, the heartbeat of humanity's final stand against a foe that seemed unstoppable. The Gorath flagship loomed ahead, its surface undulating with an eerie, organic shimmer, like a predator watching its prey draw near. "Approaching target," the navigator called out. His voice was steady, but Kale could hear the tension beneath it. The Gorath flagship was a monstrosity. Its size dwarfed Omen 9 by a factor of 10. It was a living warship, its energy core an unstable mass of swirling power, dangerous and unpredictable. It was an affront to everything humanity knew about space warfare. A ship that was alive, evolving, adapting, and now it was poised to unleash a devastating blow to Earth. "Get us in closer," Kale ordered, his voice firm despite the rising pressure. "We have one shot. Don't waste it." The ship's engines screamed as Omen 9 adjusted its course, dodging incoming fire from the surrounding Gorath ships. Plasma bolts and energy cannons flashed in the void, each one narrowly missing, lighting up the darkness like the briefest of flashes in a storm. The Gorath ships were relentless, their pursuit unyielding, but Omen 9 was faster, more agile, cutting through the battlefield like a blade through water. "We're being targeted," the tactical officer shouted, as the Gorath flagship unleashed. Another energy burst. The blast rattled Omen 9, sending shockwaves through the ship. Kyle felt the tremors in his bones, but he didn't flinch. The human spirit was built on perseverance, on pushing through impossible odds. This battle wasn't just about survival, it was about sending a message to the galaxy. "Shields holding," the officer called. "But barely! We're losing power!" "We don't have time for gradual maneuvers," Kale snapped. "Get us to that core now!" Omen 9's hull groaned as it absorbed another barrage. The Gorath flagship was attacking with everything it had, throwing everything from energy blasts to bioengineered projectiles in their path. The human ship was not designed for this kind of close-quarter confrontation, but it was still standing. Despite the odds, humanity's tenacity held strong. The crew fought through every malfunction, every failure, working as one to keep the ship in motion. Kyle's eyes narrowed as they neared the Gorath flagship. He could see the swirling mass of energy at the heart of the ship, a pulsating core that thrummed with the same sinister energy as the Gorath's organic weapons. He knew what he had to do. If he could breach the core, disrupt its stability, the entire ship would collapse in on itself. But it was a risk, a deadly gamble. The core was heavily protected, and even with the best efforts, there was no guarantee that their weapons would have the desired effect. "Prepare for a full barrage," Kale ordered, his voice filled with urgency. "Hit the core with everything we've got." The crew scrambled to comply. The ship's weapons systems fired in unison, a cacophony of plasma, lasers, and kinetic projectiles. The beams hit their mark, slamming into the flagship's protective shields with a resounding force. But the shields held strong, the organic material shifting and reshaping as the Gorath flagship adapted to the onslaught. It was too intelligent, too evolved. Their attacks were doing little more than scratching the surface. Kyle's heart pounded. This was it. There was no backup plan, no second chance. The human fleet was locked in a struggle for survival, and every calculation was leaning toward failure. Yet, in that moment of chaos, he saw something. An opening. The flagship's shields flickered, just for a moment, as the Gorath flagship adjusted its defenses. It was an imperfection, a crack in the otherwise impenetrable wall. "Now!" Kyle roared. Omen 9 surged forward, its engines pushing to their limits. The final desperate maneuver. The human ship flew toward the core, the entire crew locked in a tense silence, hearts racing as they made their final suicidal approach. The Gorath flagship's defenses began to fail. For a brief moment, Kale saw the glimmer of hope. The flagship was weakening, its once perfect regeneration failing to keep up with the intensity of the human assault. The core was exposed, a swirling vortex of energy, unstable and threatening to collapse in on itself. It was now or never. Omen 9's final assault reached its apex. A volley of energy weapons targeted the exposed core. The ship's most powerful weapons fired in rapid succession. Kyle held his breath, watching as the beams tore through the last remnants of the Gorath flagship's defenses. The core erupted. In a brilliant flash of light, a blinding explosion that sent shockwaves through the battlefield. For a moment, the universe held its breath. The Gorath flagship shuddered violently, its massive form twisting and convulsing as the explosion spread through its core. The once unstoppable force of the Gorath fleet began to break apart, its energy collapsing inward, pulling the ship into a chaotic spiral of destruction. The immense power of the flagship was its undoing. It was too vast, too unstable to survive. The catastrophic overload. Kyle watched as the flagship crumpled into itself, imploding like a dying star. The Gorath fleet around it began to scatter, their once unified purpose unraveling in the wake of their flagship's destruction. It was a moment of triumph, but it was fleeting. The battle was far from over. The Gorath were not defeated. They were simply regrouping, recalibrating. But for the first time, humanity had dealt them a blow they had never anticipated. The cost had been immense. Omen 9 had taken damage, severe damage. The crew had fought and bled for every inch of progress, and many would not return. The price of survival had been steep, but humanity had proven something that day. They were not to be underestimated. As Kale looked out at the remnants of the battle, his thoughts turned to Earth. The planet that had been the target of the Gorath's wrath, the home that had been on the verge of annihilation, was still standing. Humanity had stood tall in the face of an unimaginable threat, and they had won. But Kale knew that the galaxy was vast, and the Gorath were only one of many predators, lurking in the darkness. This was a victory, yes, but it was also a beginning. The war was far from over, and humanity, this once fragile species, had just become the one thing the galaxy feared above all else, a true contender. The screen flickered to life, the familiar face of Admiral Norin appearing. "We've done it," she said, her voice a mix of relief and exhaustion. "The Gorath flagship is down. Earth is safe, for now." Kyle nodded, but his eyes remained fixed on the stars outside the window. "For now," he repeated, knowing deep down that this was only the beginning. The battle had been won, but the war was just beginning. Humanity had earned its place in the stars, and from this day forward, no one would dare underestimate them again. If you enjoyed this thrilling journey, don't forget to like, share, and comment on what you think humanity's next move will be. The galaxy is vast, What new threats will humanity face next?